everybody, and welcome to this episode of ctl-alt-del-church. And with me today is Roddy Hamilton. Hi, Roddy.
Hi, Stuart. How are you?
I'm okay, I think. I'm never very sure.
We'll let you know.
Yeah, it's early. Still morning.
Indeed. A lot more damage to do yet.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to start with a question of I'm going to throw something back at you that you said to me a long time ago, right? And at the time I laughed, and now I think you were serious. A long time ago, well, not that long ago, because I've only been a minister for 3 years, so it must have been about 6 years ago. I said to you, I'm going to be training for ministry, and you said, oh my goodness, don't do that. What did you mean?
Well, as it said in the tin, there is an issue about being church. You know, I'm a minister. I put a 0 into year 3, and it's got 30 years. And being a minister is a peculiar thing, because church is peculiar, and it. No one can put a job description onto ministry, as you know, but you find yourself in so many peculiar places, and a lot of times you're doing things. You theoretically should be in the leading edge of everything, doing things for the first time. This has never been done before, because you'd be stretching and pulling the church in lots of different directions. And I'm not sure that we're trained to do that very well. Maybe we are now, but in my day we weren't. And the good thing is you've got a lot of initiative. You have to take your own initiative. If you don't have the initiative, then you might as well be in a cupboard. But you have to kind of keep pulling and stretching yourself. And I find that congregations can be really brilliant, and the ones I've been with have been fabulous. So enthusiastic for you, pushing you, willing you on. And there's support there as well. But no one can actually define what it is. And so why do you want to be a minister? Why would you want to do that? Well, I suppose that's a question you actually have to answer.
Yeah, they ask you that at the interview.
They have to. And there is no right or wrong there. There may be, I don't know. There may be, I've got this, that, the next thing. But usually, hopefully, people will say, I'm intrigued. It's an adventure. No one's done the kind of ministry I'm going to do before. And if you have that initiative and that kind of vision for what church and ministry and community is all about, then go for it. Absolutely. I suppose that came from a meeting I was at with you, some council or kind of board that used to be in these days, and we were all done down with all the hoops you had to jump through. And I was a convener of a vice convener of a council a while ago. And for every new idea, there were 3 hoops you had to jump through to get permission for. And by the time you got to the third one, the enthusiasm had gone. So that's where that came from. Yeah, really.
I used to be a member of staff for one of those, and there was an unsaid thing that if you didn't want to do something, you just waited for a while because it would go away. Partly because the staff would turn over, and partly because the council members would turn over, and partly because it takes so long sometimes to get something done that it's not a good idea anymore by the time you come to do it. Yeah.
And it's that kind of sense of taking a risk, which is, where we are right now, goodness, have we been trained to take risks? And you've got to be safe, but you've also got to push, and it's finding that middle road. And that's not just ministry. It's not just our kind of ministry, kind of paid, ordained ministry. It's everyone's ministry. Yeah. And if we can create a community that allows us to do that, then we've won a watch, really have, or won the kingdom. Yeah.
One of the biggest issues I think that folk talk about in terms of that, the opportunity to change or to develop or to try something new, is that one of the most problematic things in the church is that we don't ever stop doing something. So we just add more things. We don't ever stop. And perhaps this has given us this, it takes a pandemic to get you to actually stop. Yeah. Although I'm not sure that we have we?
Well, no. See, that this is really interesting. In the beginning of the pandemic, I was kind of reading some stuff, as you do, and there was an article in the Times from someone in India, an author and a journalist in India, who, why it was India, I don't know, but she was just kind of commenting that, when pandemics have come, and they have come and they've gone, they're like portals. You can make a choice to push through this hole into the future, but you actually have to leave a whole lot of stuff behind. And after the Spanish flu, that sort of happened. You know, we far more cinemas took off and parks took off at these times, and we left alone a whole lot of things. But sometimes it has to be quite a severe thing for that to happen. You know, if we can still hold on to them just to know more, then we'll bring them back, because these are our safety blankets. And yeah, I don't know whether we've managed to, what we'll let go. You know, I genuinely don't know. We'll let go a lot of things administratively, perhaps. We'll let go a lot of congregations in terms of buildings, maybe. You know, I genuinely don't know if we will do that. We're all talking that way, but whether we will or not, I don't know. You know, I think this is the easy bit of the pandemic. You know, the hard bit is when we're through it and we actually have to make these decisions about what we're going to let go, and that's going to be really hard. But these times come, and we do have to kind of have the wisdom and the daringness, the risk of letting go things, and that's not what we're here to do. We're all nice, and we don't want to upset anyone. Yeah.
Well, yeah, and you know, people. I suppose that the pull of that is that a whole lot of people have just been waiting to come back to church, and they want it to be exactly the same as it was when they left, because they've really missed it for all kinds of reasons, and some of those are really good reasons. And at the same time, we know that model of church hasn't really been working for a long time,
for generations. For generations. We've survived in legacy. You know, there was some research, and we're talking actually the church, it was 100 years ago that the church actually started declining, even though the numbers went up. Who we were as a church, our idea of what church was, the vision we had, that kind of initiative, that died 100 years ago. And we lived in legacy and goodwill. And then during the 50s, 60s, and then it's just kind of plummeting now. And, you know,
the last pandemic then. So, you know,
well, indeed,
100 years ago. So
there you go. Absolutely. That's absolutely true. And, you know, after the First World War, that we changed. And there's something quite exciting about the chance of reimagining the church. And I'm quite into that, but totally scared of letting go. This big church that I'm a minister of, you know, it keeps other churches going, you know, keeps itself going, and it's incredibly generous. I mean, honestly, we were doing our finances last night, and I'm thinking, this is just amazing how this congregation has responded and enabled things to keep going, and, you know, and hugely generous, and extra things going on as well. But what do we let go? What do we actually have to say? You know, how do we reimagine? And it's really difficult to reimagine, because you can't. You actually can't imagine what it'll be like. And I suppose it's finding ourselves in that ability to be fluid over the next few years, rather than, we can do it all again. We can pull back that. And I think we'll notice, people will not come back as much, because they'll initially be scared to be in crowds again, etc. But I think there'll be a number of people who will realise that they've been coming to church out of habit, and realise they didn't actually have to do that anymore. And I think we'll notice lots of things. And people have died, and people have, I know, and that's going to be a real. We're not feeling it quite so much at the moment, but we'll have a real grief in our congregation when we come back together and notice the gaps, and that's going to hurt. That's going to hurt. And as ministers, we're there to pastor, and everyone's there to look after each other at these times when these truths come home. But the legacy of that is we just can't do what we did, you know. And the challenge, the difficult bit is not now; it's what's coming up over the next 5 years or so. So whether we want to be in the church at that point in time, that's going to be finding our way through, because no one knows everyone's going to have an idea.
Do you think you talked about some of the extra things that, you know, so some churches have closed down, you know, they just have found that they just don't have the capacity to be in this world, this form, so they've just, you know, closed, and kind of they'll wait until it's passed and hopefully reopen, kind of thing. And other churches have really flourished. You know, you talked about that kind of sense that we don't really know who we are or what we're for. And it turns out that if you give us a crisis, then actually we're quite good at that. You know, the church is still one of the few institutions in most communities that has the capacity to respond in some way to things like this.
Yep. And so it has. In many ways it has. And that's the best of us has been able to do that. Yeah. And I mean, it doesn't take, you know, I think at the very beginning of the pandemic, it was all about, we discovered how to love our neighbour again. We're kind of forgotten a wee bit about that again. We're kind of into a routine once more. And this is how we managed to survive, because it was really, I mean, it's just I don't know if you already talked about it, but, you know, the whole pattern was just a grief curve. Yeah. You know, we're in this together. We're going to get through this. And then you hit the top and this is tiring. You know, and then, this is for a long time, and you lose the enthusiasm, the will a wee bit, and then you kind of become depressed and angry at everything and everyone. You know, that's when Boris Johnson and all the rest of it had their worst times. It was when people were really angry at him and had to project your anger or your grief onto that. And now I don't know where we are actually on the curve. We're kind of, are we finding our way? Are we kind of at that kind of finding a new worldview, getting used to this land, which isn't a bad thing. If we can get used to it before we actually think, we can pull back again, you know. Yeah.
In some ways, the vaccines come just a bit too soon.
Yes. Yeah.
So in terms of organisational change, it would, it would probably have been better if we'd had to be in this for a year.
Yeah.
And I think we might be in it for another.
Well, yes.
It's going to be after the summer before things are, everybody's vaccinated kind of thing. Yeah. If you choose to get a vaccine or believe
other vaccines are available.
Yeah. But in some ways, that allows us to say, I'll be all right. In 6 months' time, everything will be fine and we can just go back to normal.
An end point. And that's not a good thing sometimes, because grief doesn't give you an end point. No. Grief is, a 2-year, 3-year, 4, 5, 10-year process. And it doesn't come to an end. You just get used to it. Then you kind of redraw everything. And, maybe, in a kind of a peculiar way, we're not going to be in this position long enough for us to make a real. This is the thing, we don't know, and at least people are thinking about it. I think that's important, and as long as we remember these moments when we've had enthusiasm about reimagining and rethinking, and hold on to these bits rather than go quickly back to the safety of what we've always done. There is no right or wrong here. But as long as we can remember these moments when we've had this kind of inspiration that it would be good to rethink. Okay. Yeah, but it's a big thing to think.
So if we don't know what it's going to look like, and it's difficult to imagine what future church might be, how do we get there then? Because that's a terrifying situation for people. And, to say, I'm always kind of struck by the kind of, you're clinging to a bit of wreckage, and that there's a wee island over there. You just can't see it. Do you let go and swim or not? Do you know what I mean? So
absolutely. Well, what are we doing? What am I doing? I think what I am doing is, all the way through this, you're changing. Your worldview does change. You become focused on particular things that you weren't focused on before. For me, it's more visual stuff, and I think it's listening to what people are saying and looking at the numbers of where people are responding in the resources that you're offering. Most are not responding. That's the bottom line. Most are not. So either you kind of play a lot of time with that and think, well, these are a lot of people that are just going to kind of hold on to what it is and come back when it all sorts it out. But the more interesting bit are the people who are turning around to say, actually, I far prefer your online input. Mm-hmm. I far prefer the videos for 20 minutes, half an hour, than sitting in church for an hour. Because what they're saying is, I realise that I actually look at the stained glass quite a lot while you're preaching or doing whatever you're doing. So what I'm thinking is that people we're less audible and we're more visual. And we knew that, but that's proved that we can actually do a lot more visual stuff in our congregation. So therefore, if we decide that we are a spirituality that's visual, as well as we're storytellers, and I think that's basically what I've discovered. We're because people love a good story, and stories are particularly important at the moment. So how do we tell these stories best? And I think we can tell them visually. And so when we start moving back into see, that's about when we move into the space called the sanctuary, rather than go back to it, because that implies we're going to do what we did in the past. Shall we focus? If we focus now more on storytelling and how to tell these stories in this space, if that's what we do, how do we tell these stories best? How do we have to shape things to tell physically and emotionally and all the rest of it to tell these stories, which is what we always did. That's what stained glass is all about. Yeah. But they're still going on to stained glass rather than, the beautiful words that you'd spend hours crafting, So how do we tell these stories best? If we discover that what we actually like doing now is we pray more and reflect more, and how do we create a space that allows us to do that as a community? But I think the other thing is that I think what we're missing most is the connection with people. We can come to church. You come to church to connect with people, to have coffee, to catch up with the news, etc. Oh, and also worship. But you can actually do the worship online. So if I come to church, when you can't do the sharing of the coffee and catching up with folk. So that's been really important. How do we create a space that actually engages with our community better? You've got a hall, you've got some pews or seats. How can we actually rearrange that so that what we actually really missed was worshipping with people. So, and that's a line we've been thinking about and many churches have already gone down that line and rearranged their sanctuary space. But I think we have to rearrange it again, having just rearranged it, along these kind of storytelling, creating community, and doing things more visually, being aware of people who are with us rather than just the back of their necks if we've got pews. Yeah. So how we get there, we started kind of thinking about what we're going to do with all other buildings, and the fabric communer was with our estates manager, what we call them now, was saying, we're going to throw all that out, all these ideas we had, and we're going to start again, having learned the lessons. And I thought, this is good. So what are these lessons? And that's what we have to do now, is give our time to reflect on the lessons that we're learning at the moment. Yeah.
I suppose for us, that looks like we need to rewire the building, at that kind of point. And part of me thinks, well, why just stop there? If you're going to spend that kind of money, and it's a lot of money, you might as well spend a lot of money, because the reality is it's not going to be your money. It's going to be grant funding, and it's going to be all that kind of stuff. Some of it will be ours, and we'll raise some money. But at the end of the day, you're as well spending £1 million as spending
totally
£100,000, because at the end of it, you get what you want, as opposed to you fix what you've already got.
Yes, and I think that's
what you're talking about, isn't it?
Yeah, there's a kind of a philosophy in church that we'll sort that out, we'll repair that wee bit. We had in the amans that I was in, we had a heating system that was 3 different heating systems joined together. Right. So no one could come and fix it, and it was all done by people in the congregation who are fantastic, hugely loyal and able to do, and they got it to work, beyond what other people were able to do. So there was that, but we'd still do that in church. And rather than sit down and think, right, how big can we dream? We limit ourselves to what we can actually get away with fixing. How big can we dream? And even if that's so ridiculously big, at least you whittle it down a bit until you've got something that actually works for your community. And I think that's the other thing, that it's about not how we connect with ourselves, but how we connect with our community. And we keep forgetting that, but we're parish churches. So everything we do is unique for our parish. So the parish here in Bearsden and in Kilpatrick is different from across the roads. And it is literally just across the road from the Cross Church. Yep. But the cultures are different slightly. And so, you offer things that are there for only uniquely useful and designed for your own parish, because it's a parish church, and we forget that bit. And I'm just going off on a stream of thought here. The other, being a parish church means that even though you're online, and we've got people, it's great, isn't it? We've got people in Australia watching us, in Canada and New Zealand and things like that. Well, that's great. But it's kind of sort of irrelevant because you're a parish church, And, while we can do all that, your focus is connecting with the people on your doorstep. Yeah. And it has to be uniquely that. And so you can be an online church, but you're not going to be specific to the needs of the people in your local area. and it's all about connecting, loving neighbour. And so it's parish stuff. So all that money and all that designing has to be with the community in mind and not having a nice space to worship in, because that's irrelevant unless it's connected.
That's one of the big traps, I think, of online worship, is that you go for numbers. And
totally.
I've heard a lot of conversation about almost like satellite parishes or like satellite churches, so if you're set up as a broadcast hub almost, and people could get together and watch your service, does that make them part of your church? Or does that make them your church in, Auckland?
Yes.
Because you can't, they can't be part of all of it. All they can do is experience
exactly
this bit, the kind of online bit. They can't come to the coffee morning on a Tuesday.
No.
And that's really important.
Yeah, totally. I mean, it's quite interesting. I had a conversation with a colleague that who said that the worst thing we ever did was build church halls. And the reason that's a bad thing is because what we did was we created a church hall and you've got to fill it. So what you do is you create all the groups, your own design groups, to fill this hall. Okay, you can rent it out every so often, but you really got nothing to do with them. And you think you're being part of the community. All you're doing is creating space, which is important enough, but you're not connecting with people. And so we've created these church halls. We've filled it with our own badminton clubs, our own guilds, our own men's associations, our own Bible studies, etc. And we've actually, if you get rid of the church hall, you don't actually have to worry about filling it. You provide worship for the community, and all these other social groups you have to do together rather than just try and finance this hall that you've got to keep going by having all these groups.
Yeah.
It's a kind of a sideways glance at, what we should be doing as a church. We're very social and we love being social, and that's important, but we're the worshipping folk in the community, the faith folk, the tenacious folk that are here for the long term, and not to necessarily run groups to keep ourselves going and furnish our own income and keep the numbers going. However, said all that, I'm the minister. I'm not going to be the one that says knock down the building because I love the community and I love the people and I love going down because I know them, they're my friends, etc. And they'll give anything for you and you'll give anything for them because it's a relationship of love, genuinely. And I'm not going to want to change that. The theory is great, but the practice is slightly different.
Yeah, it's is it just too painful? Although I was struck there by the idea of knocking down the church hall, which appeals greatly in lots of ways. But one of the things that's happened, because we can't do that just now, so none of that's happening, is that folk have found kind of alternatives, ways of being in touch. And I wondered, one of the things I think about us going back too soon is that actually, if we'd ever got to kind of tier 2 or even tier 1 for a while, I think house things would have started to really become a thing. We had asked people just before during the summer, really, if you don't have access to watch online, then go to somebody's house and be with them. But don't all go, but. When you were allowed to go into someone else's house, go around to your neighbour and sit and take part in worship together, because that feels like a much more just a much better thing to do. It's a corporate experience, so do it with somebody else. And I had a kind of sense that might be a thing, and then obviously the pandemic gets worse. We're not allowed to go into each other's houses, and by the time we get to the point where we could work that out again, we'll be allowed to go back into the church building, so we'll forget about it. But faith at home has become much more important, I think.
That's what the body of Christ is.
Yeah.
The body of Christ is being Christ in wherever you are, in the community, in your neighbours, etc. The church is the institution, and while I love it, I hate it at the same time. It's that kind of love-hate relationship, because it's an institution and it has to keep itself going, and it exists for itself in many ways. And I know that's cynical, but that's how it feels sometimes. And, that's how it works. That's how all institutions work. But institutions are actually dying now quicker than they have, bowling clubs, golf clubs, churches, political parties on the whole. You know, all these things we're all becoming less connected in that way. And, you know, but we do need connection. I think we've discovered we do need connection and I wonder how that's going to happen. I don't know. And so as a church, what we ought to kind of allow ourselves to do is be fluid enough to allow anything, you know, just explore everything.
Oh.
And say, we're not doing this forever. We're just going to try this. We're piloting everything this year. You know, any suggestion, let's do it, you know, and see what rises to the surface, and have that risk ability to give life to things. And that's what we are as a church. And one of the things I think we've learned over the years is that we are a church that can give life to things. And when it has life, you can let it go. Mm-hmm. You know, you don't actually have to hold on to it and say it's ours and be proud of being the owner and initiator and we're going to keep this going for as long as we can. No, once it's got life and it's viable on its own, we kind of started community festivals here. And the festival now has life of its own. So we're working a way of handing that over to a community interest company and let it go. Yeah, we started it. But that's what we do. That's what we did with schools. That's what we did with hospitals. That's what we did with prisons in this, you know, in the past. And so let's give life to things and don't feel as if we have to own it. Mm. We are the creative lot. That's what people of faith are. We are tenacious. We're trustworthy. We are able to do things. And we've got the organisation that allows us to put all these things together, give it life, and let it go. And it has its own life. You know, and that's what we do. That's what God does. That's what, you know, that's what creation's about. Mm. That's why we've got evolution, you know, etc. God lets it go. And, you know, maybe that's where we are now. Just let it go. Let it go. And we burst into song. Yeah.
Oh, no.
Soundtrack there, yeah.
Absolutely. So it seems to me that for you that the worship part of that is really important because that's the bit that energizes and is almost the kind of the creative. I don't know what it would be, the kind of the seed, the thing that or perhaps even the soil that allows these ideas to grow and connects us to this sense that you know we're about something. You know, this isn't just a social club. We're about birthing these new ideas.
Yeah, in many ways, it's the unique thing, isn't it, about a church? Not the only. I mean, other people worship in other ways, obviously, but I think it's having this bundle of stories that we've got, and as we're meant to do every week, is reinterpreting them for this age, and I suppose I've found myself doing that. I'm not going to say do it more. That's not true because we do it every Sunday. But because we're in this very peculiar situation, suddenly these stories are recontextualized. Suddenly you discover things in them that you hadn't, because you weren't in this space, you couldn't see them before. And that makes them faith stories because they're not time bound in any way. And it's just been incredible how you've found connections and being able to retell this story and thought, oh, wait a minute, wow, you know, that makes sense suddenly in this way. And all the how we can actually use these stories to reshape our community now. You know, a couple of weeks it was the parable, the tenants, you know, the talents, not the tenants, the talents. And, you know, we've always told this story as if it's about talents, and it's not about talents at all. You can use it as talents, that's no problem. But, you know, what did the first hearers hear in this story? That's this question we have to ask ourselves every time we tell these stories, because it's not how we hear it. It's obvious, sometimes 180 degrees different. And, you know, the parable, the talents is that the last guy was the one that says to who buried his talents, which was a way to do things. But he said, here's it back. I'm not going to take part in this system that you've got me as a slave, you as a landowner, you disappear and I look after your money for you. Forget it, you know, and here's it back. And the reality is, well, if you do that, you're chucked out. You know, this is a parable about the world. And so taking these talents as the church and living like that, taking the risk of being, ostracized by speaking truth to power. And so when we reshape this community, this new community, this new normal, which we can do, because we've got the stories to as the foundation of all of that, use these stories to shape it. And I remember once talking to a previous moderator, or I can't remember what it was about. Was it about the Westminster Confession or all these kind of rules we've got and things like that? And I did suggest to him in a kind of throwaway comment, maybe we should just get rid of all of that and just replace them with stories. And he did nod and said, yeah, it wouldn't be a bad thing. Use the stories of Jesus rather than try and have all this doctrine and policy, etc.
Yeah, because what it does is that tries to boil it all down to the right answer.
Yes, and there isn't an answer.
About the right answer.
There is only an adventure.
Yeah.
There's only a question that leads to, and if you try to answer that question, you lead to an adventure. It's a way, it's not about answers. And use the stories as your basis, because that's what we've got. And they're fabulous for doing that. The whole kingdom is based on all these, the Good Samaritan, it's such a good story at this time to tell for two reasons. One is we have to be the guys that walk on the other side of the road in many ways, just to keep safe. But then you've got this Samaritan who the first hearers would not identify with at all. Suddenly we identify with the Samaritan as the Good Samaritan. No. The first people who heard it would identify the guy that's beaten up on the road. And then you have to realize, actually, I have to have my enemy, because one day that enemy is may have to look after me, may be the person that saves me from, So, retell these stories and use them to reshape the community we've got now. And that's what worship does. It opens that possibility rather than tell the stories we've heard it as Sunday school children. That's fine. Tell it as Sunday school children, but there's another way of hearing it. There always is another way of hearing it. And it's up to us to do all the groundwork in that, to research, to listen again, through all the centuries of how these stories have been told. Here's a way of telling this story. It may not be what you're wanting to hear or right for this moment, but it's a way, and just let it ferment and see what it changes. And
it's interesting you brought up the parable of the talents. The first time I heard the interpretation that you just gave of it was from a South African woman. During my training, and we were talking about it, and it was one of those, it's about this, and she said, no, it's not. No, it's not. And I wondered, that's born out of crisis.
Yes.
And I wonder actually if these stories make much more sense in crisis, because they were told in crisis. And we're in the middle of a crisis, and so they,
spot on. And that's what's happened.
Yeah.
That's why I think these stories I feel much more alive to them, because we are in crisis.
Yeah.
And you hear them differently.
Yeah.
And all and every story's like that. It was Jonathan Sachs who says that who used to be the chief rabbi died suddenly and sadly, a month or so ago, who said that, you can only take these stories as metaphor. Don't take them as that's the heresy, is taking them too literally, because they're stories that are meant to speak into a moment and through a moment, and you hear different things in them, and he was really interesting for all of that, and I would recommend reading everything he wrote. He's good at reinterpreting and re-understanding them in a particular time, and that's why they're faith stories. They're not tied down.
Yeah. So one of the ways that you do that, and you help other people to do that, and I'm hugely grateful for, is that you write things down, which is, and you share them, which is one of the things that we're not particularly good at. We're all about either precious or far too modest, or whatever it is that stops us from sharing things that we create. I'm terrified that people think they're terrible. Probably is the kind of thing that's at the heart of most of it. But for years and years and years, you've written bits of liturgy that you've shared generously with anybody that wants it. You're not at all precious about that. Why do you do that?
Well, two things. One is, in the sharing of these things, there's always the caveat that you must not use this as it is written. You have to adapt it and edit it to suit your own space, culture, people, language, etc. Because it's written, I have in mind who I'm writing that for, and that's the congregation that I'm with. And between the two congregations I've been in, the writing is quite different because you're in a different space. And I'm just looking for, in my red section, and they all fall down. Common ground. Yep. It frustrates me no end that people open it and read. No, it says read the front bit. If you're going to read anything in Common Ground, read the preface, and it says there, don't take the words straight off the page. These are just ideas. These are hints. This is the shape of liturgy, right? This will give you an idea, but take the words and then develop your own and grow them for your own language. There's nothing prescriptive about a free church, and we are a free church. We write our own liturgy. And so part of maybe the writing of it is to kind of just keep hammering home that we are designed as ministers to write liturgy. That's what we are called to do. That's the one task that is uniquely ours, is to write that liturgy. So I do. And people have asked for copies, so I just send it to people if they want, with the caveat, rewrite this, please, for your own thing. It was 20 years ago, no, more than that, 30 years ago, we used to use Whole People of God resources. It's up here on my shelf somewhere. And there's a wee part of that that said it was called Collective Wisdom. And the idea was that you used their material, it's written in Canada, and you threw it back at them the way you've edited it for your own culture. And they're always interested in that. And I did that for years and years and years and years, just because I'm a good Presbyterian. I do what I'm told, and that's what I did, and so sent it back. And then I got a wee email one from a guy I didn't know, and said, you won't know who I am, Roddy, but we've actually found some of your collected wisdom stuff that you send back. We quite like what you've done. We're wondering if you could write for this new resource called Seasons of the Spirit. You may want to think about this, but we're going to have to ask you to come over to San Francisco. And then 6 months later, come over to Kelowna, which is in the Okanagan Valley in British Columbia. And I said, how long do you want me to think about this? So politely left it a day and replied, yes. But being part of a community that writes kind of realizes that this is alive and this stuff is freshly done all the time. And there's a whole community of people out there that does that. And we don't share that, as you say, often enough, because I'm desperate to hear from I have my own poets and authors and things like that I go to, but you're always keen to hear how it's happening in the church next door, because as ministers we don't connect. We don't go and we can't go and see other people's worship and experience it.
We can now.
Pardon?
We can now.
We can now. Yeah, I know. Yeah, that's right.
And that's a mildly terrifying thing.
And then you realize, oh no. But
partly, but also I think, oh yes. I see loads of stuff that I think I'd never have thought to do that or say that. Or
that's the thing,
and it's brilliant.
Yeah, totally, and that's why. And we're here. We're meant to be the creatives. So be creative, and our gift is to be able to share that beyond our own congregation, because we're ministers of the church, capital C, universal, and not just the minister of the parish. And yes, people can be very precious with things like children's addresses. I don't do children's addresses anymore, but we do kind of conversations and things like that. But I remember, I've got a Christmas children's address that I'm not going to tell anyone because I don't want them to use it, because it's mine, and everyone says that, and it's true. You have that with prayers as well, and communion liturgies and things if they don't use common order, but it's not valuable unless it's used, and shared and adapted and I don't know whether it's because of Queen Elizabeth, the first, when printing presses came out, they started, the Book of Common Order or Common Prayer was published, and so she said, or the church at that time said, you have to use this. And at that stage, you had your Glasgow Mass, your Coventry Mass, your St Andrew's Mass. They're all slightly different, growing from around the community, the culture of the cathedral or abbey or whatever. And then the printing press came out, and then it standardised everything. And eventually they said, if you don't use the Book of Prayer, Common Prayer, then one, we're going to take your salary, your stipend away, your house away, and then we'll actually imprison you. So suddenly we all feel as if we've all got to do the same stuff. No, that's not what liturgy is about. Liturgy is of the people, the work of the people, and it's the people of the parish. So we hear and listen to the parish, write the words, shape the liturgy round their needs, or whatever their ambitions, etc., faith, whatever they are, and let it live. Let it grow, and etc., rather than standardize it and do the same thing. No wonder the churches, are dull if we keep doing this. I once did. I don't tell anyone who wrote this book. I wrote, write, your own communion liturgies every communion for the moment in time, etc. And 1 week, I don't know why I did it, but I took the liturgy out of this, word for word. It was the first Sunday. I got so many complaints. It was boring. It was dull. And that proves this gives you the shape of the liturgy. That's all it does. And let it grow, because people, I think, are engaged enough to hear familiar words for their own community, as well as you bring in all the ancient words. Because if you can do it, you can do that beautifully. It's alive in this community, but we're going to pull in, and nothing we have is Church of Scotland. Everything is Orthodox or Roman, or it comes from hundreds of years ago. None of it is Church of Scotland. And so we use all these ancient words to become the ecumenical, worldwide, universal, global church. But it's also in this moment and this place and this time, because we use our own words and culture and language to hold these ancient words.
So what would you say to, so the danger of that then is that, so we both, well, you do, and I occasionally do, right, for Spill the Beans. You usually finish the bits that I don't do. So we create a liturgy book, and then we give it to people. And if they're anything like me, they think, oh, I'm really busy, it's Thursday. I'll just use the prayer. Is there a danger in that, or is the hope always that at some point I'm going to say, well, that doesn't quite fit. I'm going to have to sit with this for a while and fix it and cut bits out of it and put in some other bits. And, so even if I'm not writing my own liturgy, what I am doing is editing and thinking about the context that I'm in.
Yeah, that's absolutely what to do. I mean, I suppose I'm going to say they use the word compromise, but that's not the word I want to use. I think we should be busy doing liturgy, because that comes from the work that we do. And that's the outflowing of your week's work, into the people that's called worship. Okay, and I get that we can be so busy that sometimes you can't sit down and write that stuff from scratch. And so therefore, that's when you take the idea and edit it and adapt it so that it feels familiar, in your mouth and in your people's, that's rubbish, God's people's ears. So yeah, that's the right thing to do. But I write, when we use Seasons or Spill the Beans, etc. I write it, but I never use it again because I've moved on. That was 3 or 4 months ago. I'm not in that place anymore. And you move on again. You're alive to it a wee bit more. So never ever have used anything I've written for a publication. Kind of part of that is that Seasons of the Spirit, which was kind of grew out of Whole People of God. They had 4 publishing houses, or part of 4 different denominations, and so when you started writing. It became a point, it had to become not the lowest common denominator, but it became, because everyone had to, you can't say that, and you can't say that. And, you've got to, that's when it doesn't work. That's why you write for the people that you're ministering among. And take all the chances, take all the risks, do all the wrong things, but it's right for this time, this place, this people, etc. So liturgy is alive. And you can't repeat it. And the other thing is, it's a massive investment. You spend a lot of time writing, finding the right. I mean, I could spend hours. And I spend a lot of time, writing. I don't spend hours doing it. You just find a technique of doing it. But once you've used it, you've used it. And it's really expensive stuff. And I was talking to a colleague again about legacy. As we all kind of start to retire and churches are closing down, what's going to be left? And we realised that that's actually the wrong question. Everything we do is for the moment in much of this stuff. Caring for someone in the moment, writing the worship in the moment. And that's where it's expensive, because you never go back to it.
See, that answers a question that I've always had. Where's the book of Roddy Hamilton's collected liturgy?
No, there's never going to be.
That's the answer. There will never be that book.
No, absolutely not. Yeah. Absolutely not. And it's only given away if people ask for it as well. You know, it's not out there, you know, right, come, and it's absolutely quite the opposite. It's only there because people ask, and it's only there with a caveat as a starter. It's not very good. It worked for me, but I hope it doesn't work for you. You know, you're the wrong people.
Yeah. Do you think our preparation for ministry even touches on some of that stuff? Because I think there's this kind of sense that you do an academic thing, which in some senses should give us some tools to ask good questions. That's what I think academic study is all about. It's actually about enabling you to ask good questions. But that whole idea of being creative, I think, is something that you can learn. It's something that you can develop. It's something loads of people say, oh, that's not me, I can't do that, and that's nonsense. You know, we can all find ways to be creative. And perhaps one of the things that's happened in the pandemic is that we've had to do that. You know, we've been forced to think about, well, if I can't do it like this, how am I going to do it? And that's a creative process.
That's a good thing.
You know, so how do we get people to?
I mean, it's a really interesting question. I mean, is it Pope? Which Pope was it? I can't remember. But one of the last couple of popes, one of them said that, you know, if you're ever going to lead the mass, you have to have 6 months looking at art. Sorted. Absolutely. You know, we do a lot of academic stuff, and that's absolutely right. Shelves full of it, you know, and that's good because you need the words and you need the kind of the background and all that sort of stuff. But we also need. I would suggest two things. If I was going to be trained as a minister, there's two things I'd look for. One is I'd be forced to do a 6-month community project at least. So how to learn to engage with folk in community, partnership working, fundraising, all these sort of things, and speak to people that you don't often speak to, and engage and find a different worldview. Do that. And the other thing is to do an arts course on art or poetry or music or sculpting or just something. I mean, you've used this a few times, this illustration that a lecturer who said, go into the art gallery and pick one painting, doesn't matter what it is, and stare at it for a day. That's all you have to do. Look at nothing else. Take your sandwiches, stare at that picture of the day. And I'll guarantee you, she said, that by the end of the day, you'll see something. Just in the last 5 minutes, you'll see something that you hadn't seen, that you've been looking at for the last 6 hours. And that painting will become something really special to you, and then you'll use it as a voil, a lens through which to see the world. That's what we should be doing in our writing, because we're not taught how to write liturgy particularly well. And part of that is, well, you go into the parish and you learn how to do it. No, you don't.
You don't.
No one sits down and says, this is how you craft things. I don't know how to do it. I mean, I probably should have, where I did hires, when they do have hires, I failed my higher English completely, so badly it wasn't even a compensatory O grade. There was nothing on the certificate, which is an advantage, you know. But it was mince. And what I should have been allowed to do was choose the creative writing option, but the teacher said, "Don't go anywhere near that." And I don't know why, but I imagine it's because they don't know how to mark it. Yeah. How do you mark creativity? You know, what's good creativity is some is bad to someone else, etc. I did this English again and passed. But now I write poems all the time, and you know, and all these sort of things. It's a bit of a maturity thing. But there's a thing that you can't mark creativity, but you can. I think you're right. You can teach it. You can give people opportunity to explore it and engage with it. And to be able to do that, I think our storytelling and our creative space and our liturgy would be far more interesting to hear and possibly also look at, because I think we would develop that more. But we keep falling back onto this is safe. Yeah. Someone's done this for us, the panel and doctrine or whatever it was in these days.
Yeah, and that's that's just about partly engaging with the world, isn't it? Because
totally, 100%. That's all it is.
It's full of art, and I always think you can tell the weeks that I've spent sitting at my desk and not really engaged with anything else, because when it comes to Sunday and I've got to say something, it's almost always disengaged.
Yes.
Whereas if I've been in the world and looking at things and watching films and reading books and all of that kind of stuff, you can tell, because it all finds its way in there somehow. And
how often have you found the connection and something you never thought? I mean, we're just talking about this bookshelf here, it's all coloured, coded, because I think in colour, I remember a book by the colour of its cover. But what you do is you pick out a book from the shelf, and there's another book that's entirely different, but it's the same colour. So you pull that out as well, and there's a connection. You find connections between things. So, and I think it's invariably you read something, see something, watch something, and you realise 2 days later when you're coming down to write something, oh, wait a minute, there's a connection there. And that was the tradition of the beauty of a Scottish education, that you had multi-medium, you did physics and you did art and you did maths and you did, whatever. And that's why you had such brilliant inventors, because they used different areas of work and brought them together and created things.
And that's what stories do, isn't it? They
totally.
What they do is just give us a lens to bring all of those things together.
That's right. Yeah, and it's a kind of a story is a magnet. It pulls us into it, and when we're in the middle of it, it can chuck us back out again. And I'm in a different world. Or you see things, you keep thinking about that stories, you watch things and you see connections between it. So these are the stories that are real, and last. And that's why they're, 3,000-4,000 years old. And one of our stories is the oldest story on the planet, which is the story of Noah and the Epic of Gilgamesh. That's why they're still around. They're brilliant. Love it.
Yeah, And I think, I suppose part of that task then is to help other people to make those connections with the things that they encounter.
Yeah,
and so what we do is provide a framework for other people to make those connections in the way that we've done.
And that's what we should be able. And if that's what we're doing, how do we create a space physically and emotionally and spiritually to do that? And it does mean physically. So how do you rearrange where you worship and engage and contact people in order to do that? We have coffee after the service, and it's only recently we put tables out. Everyone was standing. People engage better at a table. Yeah. And you actually, is this seat free? Can I sit down? Suddenly you get another conversation going. Yeah. People don't easily walk into groups of people standing because it's more intimidating. But sitting down is more open.
Yeah. It forms the group, doesn't it?
So it's
older and you can't get in.
Correct. Yeah. So it's about physical, spiritual, and emotional space. How do if what we're doing is telling stories and getting people to engage with these things and seeing the world, what do we actually have to do now to create a different space that allows that to happen? And we keep on jumping too far ahead. We keep on jumping. We're going to change it. We could do this in the church. We could do that in the church. No. That's not. You're never going to talk about that. Talk about what are we about. If we understand what we're about in any ways whatsoever, how do we reshape everything we do? The language, the meetings, the space, the times we meet, everything, in order to allow that thing that we say we're about to happen best.
One of the words that people then use about the liturgy is that it's a drama.
Yes, completely.
But it's possibly the worst staged drama in the world then, isn't it? So what you're saying is that the staging of this playing out of these stories and the unfolding of them, we don't, we've made it about a person standing in a box, up high so that people can hear them. And, and sometimes, as you said, be distracted by the stained glass because that's the only thing there is to look at. Mm-hmm. And they'll, we sing some songs because, who can listen to somebody speaking for an hour, or because the music actually engages with us in a very different way.
Yes.
And is very important. And it's one of the things that I think people, of all the things that folk miss, it's the thing that probably we've dropped out of the online service. There's not as much music.
Yeah.
And people really miss it.
Yeah.
Because music does something that other things don't do.
Yeah, totally. And is that part of the training we should give, not just ministers, but congregations as well, those who are interested, community projects, engage with the art. But part of that is how to do drama. How does a film director direct a film? How does he or she create these moments, that atmosphere? Because you're absolutely right. The shape of the building is drama, because it's shaped in a particular, it's not just kind of thrown together, it's thought about. The windows are drama. The liturgy is drama. And think of the two sacraments we have, the two signs we actually have is communion and baptism, both massive dramas, hugely so. And what we do is we kind of tap the water on, we should be pouring water and lots of noise to start off with and things like that, and create the drama, and then, do all the bits we traditionally do, but create the drama in the space and the table, create a shape, a space that I actually want to be around that table. Yeah. There's something happening on that table. It's live. It's not just beautifully pewtered goblets that no one's allowed to touch except the minister. There's nothing that no one else is not allowed to do in the communion except the epiclesis bit, the bit that says, I call down the Holy Spirit. And you don't actually have to have that. Yeah. It's not in there, and it doesn't have to be in there. And John Knox didn't have it. He wrote it. He didn't have it in there. And that's the only bit you're meant to be ordained to be able to do. So everyone can do everything else. So let's do the drama. Let's tell the stories with pictures. There you go.
Amen. I'm going to enjoy being at your heresy trial.
That's right. I'm sure there's a queue of them, though. And after these times, there might be a longer queue. Yeah,
that's it.
All the things we've tried out have been the better for it.
Brilliant. Yeah. Roddy, thank you so much for your time today. That's been a fantastically inspiring conversation, as always.
Yeah, that's all it is. Yeah. Enjoy.